They're jacked with Pepsi.
I'm there for the pack out. You just got to pack me in.
Committed to the bow early on. Like I love getting close and putting up.
You cover a range of stuff on here too, right? Like
We call this the THP World Headquarters.
My grandpa Roy Weatherby.
I came into like that golden little pocket where there was like 4 or 5 different bulls. Just
You're Canadian? We're doing a Canadian podcast?
My name's Douglas Bode.
I'm Robbie Denning.
Roy Candy.
Well, happy to have you on the show. I've been looking for this for a while. Actually, I've been following along for the last couple of years. I think I've been following you for, I don't know, I think since 2023. We kind of connected and been just chatting, mostly just bow hunting, but we definitely have some common stuff going on as far as industry and work and all of that stuff. Why don't you just let the listeners know kind of your background and maybe a little bit of how you started getting into hunting? Because you're like the ultimate package when it comes to an outdoorsman. You got the spearfishing, the big reef fishing. I was looking at some of that, bow hunting in the States, and now getting back home, right? As an Aussie. So why don't you break that down for us?
So maybe we'll go way back when I was a young fella, sort of growing up in the north of Australia. Small town called Darwin, and it was really sort of the last frontier of Australia out there. We're about 100,000 people, but everyone there fishes, right? When you grow up as a kid for like your first birthday, if your dad's not putting a fishing rod in your hand, there's something wrong with that family. So look, really cut my teeth chasing barramundi, which is probably the poster child for sports fishing in Australia. Doing that as a young kid, and then into my teen years, we could get our license at sort of 15 and a half back in the day, and my friends and I would just jump in the Hilux and we'd go out into the bush and just go fishing for our weekends. It was kind of really, really interesting stuff. And that sort of led us into some of those sort of backcountry billabongs, sort of remote areas where we saw a lot of different animals out there from, the water buffalo, pigs, and then that sort of just progressed into some rifle hunting, sort of seeing those animals in the wild. It sort of just captured me and wanting to be out there and spending time in the bush. So that's kind of how I got introduced to all of this. And, I'd sort of, I finished university and started traveling around the world for a little while and found myself snowboarding in Canada, spent some time up in Whistler.
Nice.
I guess it's a rite of passage for a lot of Aussies to spend a couple of winters up there. Sort of little Australia out there just in that Whistler area. So did that for a while and sort of still fished along the way, chasing salmon and that sort of stuff and trout there in New Zealand. Spent some time in Switzerland. And then I came home to Australia. Dad tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Look, you've had fun for the last 5 years. It's about time you got a real job." And I managed to drag a Canadian girl back to Australia with me. She's now my wife of almost 20 years. We settled in the north, back in Darwin, did a lot of fishing, but never really got into bow hunting at that point. I had a couple of friends that were doing it. They invited me out and sort of I got to see a little bit of it, but never really got fully engaged. And as part of my job, I work in the renewables and energy storage industry. A bit of commonality there. So that took me all around the world traveling, and I spent time in Alaska, back in Canada, sort of all along the west coast of Australia. But that was a small company, and we got bought out by a big multinational, and they wanted to take our technology and move it to the US market. So it was a pretty easy sell to my wife. I put my hand up and said, "Let's go." And we found ourselves in North Carolina back in 2013, and we bought some rural property, and I had some whitetails running through the backyard, and I just kind of fell into bow hunting at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So, how long did you hunt whitetail for before you caught the itch to go for big Western?
Yeah, so I guess it was 2013 right up until sort of COVID. So I had about 6 years of whitetail hunting, sort of in around the Raleigh area of North Carolina. And I did a couple of trips not far from there, but it was always in state.
Hmm.
And I met a few people online and started chatting. And I actually, when I first moved to North Carolina, made some friends in the spearfishing community because that's where I was familiar as well.
Yep.
And one of them said to me, he's like, "Hey, you've got some land. Can I come up and do some whitetail hunting?" And so I invited him up, and he spent a bit of time with me at my house. And he said to me, "Hey, my dad's got a ranch out in Wyoming, and I
Holy
go elk
smokes.
hunting a fair bit out there." So he planted the seed,
Yeah.
and I started applying and could never get my non-residency. I just wasn't drawing each year. But he rang me one day and said, "Hey, there's this draw hunt in Texas. It's super cheap to apply. It's like $10. It's on one of the wildlife refuges. And if you draw, the tag's like $100, and you can go take as many pigs and as many of the wild game that's down there. And the key one is really the nilgai antelope." And anyway, the two of us put in and drew the first year down
Oh
at
yeah.
Laguna Atascosa. And so that was my first out-of-state hunt. And I got lucky. I had one walk past broadside at 20 yards, and the arrow sailed true, and that's when the bug really bit. It's like, all right, this is fun. Going out of state,
Yeah.
traveling, exploring new places. Yeah, that's where it really got me.
So this is like as far as like beginners and kind of going on a leap of faith. What was it like going from in state, you went out of state, and then once you start hunting elk, because I know you eventually started hunting elk, mule deer. How did you approach that? Because well, I obviously you're comfortable being outside of your comfort zone, but how did you make that jump to hunting elk and big country, and how did you approach that?
Yeah, so look, I'd like to think I'm a little bit of a student of whatever I do. I will always go and read literature.
Hmm.
And look, there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet, podcasts like your own, going to YouTube, doing a lot of research. So I just spent the time going through all of that. Think of all the big players in the industry, go and read their stuff, listen to what they have to say. And for me, I like to think I do things my own way, but it's a blend of different people's
Hmm.
styles and inputs that I guess probably built who I am as a hunter. But what it really got down to is I got sick of putting in for tags in Wyoming and Montana.
Yeah.
Had a little bit of a midlife crisis and just quit my job of 17 years without anything to go to, sold the house, packed up my life and moved the wife and kid to Montana, moved into
Hmm.
Bozeman, and then I just went about really trying to figure out how to go and get an elk. That was my primary goal. I spent my first summer there sleeping in the back of the ram and camping out, sort of in the middle of nowhere. I would literally look on X and say, "I'm going to go there because it looks like there's some good cover, some good bedding,
Yep.
and some water." And I'd just go there and I'd hike around for the weekend and just collect all the information I could, and sort of really, really fell in love with that part of the world. So, that's kind of how I introduced myself to it, and then sort of met a couple of local guys in Bozeman. I got really lucky. I found a couple of people that were willing to open up to an outsider.
Yep.
Those that have spent time in Bozeman understand that people can be a little bit introverted when it comes to introducing new people into the area. But yeah, a couple of guys really took me under their wing and helped me understand a little bit more about how to use the mountains to my advantage. I knew how to play wind and things like that, but really understanding, how to get on the same level with an animal, how to call and all that sort of stuff. So it was really a baptism of fire over those first 6 months until we got into opening day, which happened to be when I got my residency, the 180-day minimum requirement, the day before season opened. So it was just fortuitous that it played out the way it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you primarily a spot and stalk guy, or are you a call them in close?
Um, a bit of a mix. I have found what works for me. I generally won't get on the bugle tube until I hear one bugle. Um, that's as a general rule.
Hmm.
I like to be quiet. I've spent enough time in the woods in Australia and also in North Carolina. Look, North Carolina taught me a lot. I really challenged myself over the last sort of 2 years I was there, where I chose not to sit in a tree stand and I was doing spot and stalk whitetail.
Holy smokes,
And man,
that's
if you want
tough.
to challenge yourself, go do that, right?
Yeah.
That is a different animal altogether. But what it taught me is how to be quiet in the woods and really to take two or three steps, reevaluate what's in front of me, look
Yeah.
between the trees, look for slight movements. And I'd stand still for 10 minutes, not see anything, and then I'd take another 5, 10 steps.
Hmm.
So I got really comfortable doing that. Um, and so when it came to the big mountains, I was comfortable, right? I was
Hmm.
walking around, and I found you could even make noise out there, and particularly with the elk when they're rutting, like you can be loud. You
Yeah.
can walk around, you can bash up trees and all that sort of stuff, and it's pretty okay to do that. So. Going back to your question, generally I like to be quiet, but look, if one's starting to chirp, I've got zero problems pulling out the tube and having a go back at him.
Yeah, it's funny thinking about like where you are now and what you used to like your mentality or your approach before, where you're just bushwhacking, you're making a ton of noise, but the wrong kind of noise. You're just moving too quick, and just how
Yeah,
slowing down. I think that's one thing that, people talk about efficiency to kill and like how do you get it done quick? It's you have to slow down when the time is right. Like you're coming into an area to hunt, it's kind of a game of hide and seek. You need to find them before they find you, and
yeah,
slowing down, letting things kind of transpire. Like we don't make noise. We slow down the things that we can control and let things happen a little bit, And
yeah,
that's big game Western hunting in a nutshell, right? It's covering terrain, but you just learn these little tips and tricks as you go along, and you can't. There's no way of you can read a lot, but getting out there and getting it done, putting those days in, that's what really makes a big difference, right?
yeah, yeah. I agree. And one of the people that I guess I like the way he approaches hunting is Randy Newberg. And I
Yeah.
remember when I first moved to Bozeman watching some of his stuff that he has online. And there was an elk episode where he was sitting down for lunch and he had his boots off and he's just eating a sandwich. And a herd of elk just walked past him. And he was just sitting there on camera watching them at 20, 30 yards, right? And so um, that really stuck with me when I first got there. And I often found that exactly as you said, when you just slow down and just take your time, things appear out of the woods, right? It's one
Yeah.
of those things that when you're moving, they
Yeah.
see you before you
Yeah,
see them.
exactly.
And so when you take their approach and you just sit down, take your time, you'll start to see them move, and they're moving in a natural way, and then you really start to understand the animal. And I think that's where, as a student, I excel. I think that's the part that I
Yeah.
probably, it just comes naturally to me, is watching an animal, understanding how they move, and then being able to make a plan around that. That's something that I have found easy. Well, the easiest of all the things that I had to pick up.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think that's probably the most important is understand the behavior of the animals, the why. Newberg is so amazing for just explaining that in a tangible way that's digestible for people, especially a lot of beginners, is just the core needs of elk, right? They're doing
Right.
things, but why and when they're doing them, why they're moving in areas, why are they, what are their priorities? Is it feed? Is it rut activity? All those things. And I just love the material he's putting out. I used to use it all the time. Still, some of the funniest hunting videos that even my kid brings up is just, going into crazy canyons that you have no business carrying
Yeah.
elk out. Or there's one where he's like, looks like I'm trying to prove how stupid I am by going into this hellhole. I love it. I love it. I completely agree with what you're saying. It's funny. Um, the one thing that's really interesting about your whole experience is that adaptability, like I would talk about like what your last season was, but it kind of seems like you just keep hunting.
Yeah.
I was looking, it was like, oh, he's hunting elk, and then you're hunting mule deer, and then you're going to Texas, and then now you're back in Australia. What is that like, taking that methodology towards different species, like going from elk, cutting your teeth on that, and then going to mule deer? What was that like? What were the challenges from that?
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of stuff that overlaps there, right? That
Hmm.
that you can utilize. I'll be very frank here, and I got real lucky on that mule deer that I
Yeah.
got last season or this one before. I was in the right place at the right time. Maybe it was just fortuitous that I understand. I was saying, I understand how the animals move, and as I was walking to what I thought would be a really good bedding area for elk, I just worked my way down thinking, you know what, this is good sort of mule deer terrain. It just feels right.
Yeah.
And just as I thought that, I saw one in my periphery. And so, just to be clear, I got real lucky on that one because I've had a lot of hunts chasing mule deer the
Yeah.
season after that I did where, man, it was hard, like hard
Yeah.
work, especially when you get into that open terrain, sort of heading east of Bozeman, where I was living, getting into some of those more open terrain areas. That's where I was really put to the sword, trying to get in close on those old wily mule deer. Those sort of 200 class animals. That they've got a sixth sense. They know something that is going on well before you get
Yeah.
there. And so to me, that was like a game of chess. Chasing that particular species is really trying to use the land to your advantage, finding those draws, those little folds in the terrain, making sure that the wind is going to stay true, even if the wind went off axis, say 30 degrees, making sure that
Hmm.
they weren't going to get wind. That was the part that I really loved about the mule deer hunting in Montana. Really challenging, and I know you've put a couple down over the years. And look, I really look to archery mule deer as one of the most challenging Western
Yeah.
hunts that there is. The antelope is fun, not as challenging. There is something that I think you can get 5 or 6 chances on antelope a day, but mule deer, look, I've spent 3, 4 hours doing a stalk to get into like, I don't know, 35 yards, almost
Yeah.
getting ready to take a shot. The wind shifts or you step on a twig or something and they're gone. They're just up and
Yeah.
out of there. So I really love the mule deer hunt, particularly the archery. It's a lot of fun. But a lot of these skills interlay or overlay across species. So, just coming home to Australia at the start of this year, it's the rut right now. So right now we've got our red deer and the fallow deer are rutting hard. The reds are starting to taper away, but very similar to hunting elk and mule deer. The nice thing about the fallow is they croak, so that they give themselves up pretty easy. So it's easy to find them. And when they're rutting hard, they're just as silly as elk, right? They lose a lot of their faculties. All they're thinking about is trying to fend the other males off whatever does in heat, and so you can get some good chances. The reds maybe a little bit more like mule deer. They're a little
Yeah.
more wily. But very similar. When they're roaring, it's like an elk. They'll do a couple of location calls, and then you can use the terrain and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of similarities between the Western big game and hunting some of the deer we have in Australia.
And what about the big stuff? I know you've been like water buffalo, getting into that stuff. What's that like?
Yeah. Um, Fun. Like that is a fun hunt. So that takes me back to where I grew up as a kid. So in the north of Australia, the area that I grew up was in Darwin in the Northern Territory. Um, the state is 2.5 times the size of Texas, and it's got about 150,000 people total that live in that area, and 120 live in Darwin. So there's not a lot of people over the rest of that area. Um, the water buffalo was introduced, I think, in like the 1850s from Asia, and it was used as a food source. They sort of abandoned some of the camps up there in the north, and they
Yeah.
just became a wild animal, and they've sort of spread right across the north. Um, they're they're big. They're very impressive when you get up close to them,
Yeah.
and um, and they're in some really challenging terrain. A lot of it is very flat, so you have to use the scrub, the savanna, whatever landmarks you can use or terrain, you have to use that to get in close to them. I've had a chance of arrowing probably 10, but I've never found the one to me that I thought, yeah, this is the one that I want to take. I've got some stuff up on Instagram where I've got, selfie footage of me within sort of 20 yards of them, but never really found the one where I'm like, this is the big animal that I want to take and hang on my wall. I've never really felt that. I've seen them at distance. I've seen some of those big guys, but they're like any big animal. When they get old, they get very wily, and they know how to amazingly disappear. For an animal that big to disappear so
Yeah.
quickly, in the scrub, it's pretty special.
Yeah, it's amazing with these big animals. Like moose is the same thing. They're just like bulldozers. When they're in
Yeah.
danger, they just run through everything and anything until they forget. They're like dinosaurs, right?
Yeah.
What is that like for like how you're selecting your arrows and for archery? I would presume there's some pretty specific stuff you're doing to get the hitting power, right?
Yeah. So, maybe I'll talk through a little bit how I progressed in my setup, right?
Yeah.
So I really went down the rabbit hole, looking at arrows once I realized I was doing that nilgai hunt. When I was in North Carolina, I was shooting maybe a 420 grain arrow, pretty stock standard. A lot of it was just straight out of the box, whatever veins were on there, I was using, right? And when it came to this nilgai hunt, I was like, you know what, that's not going to work. I've read enough about them. They're a big animal,
Yeah.
big, strong shoulders, and where their vitals sit, it's a little further forward. So most of the time, you're probably going to have to punt through some shoulder area. And yeah, I just thought now's the time to really sort of go into the rabbit hole and really figure out what sort of arrow I want to use. So I ended up using, I think it was like a 530 grain arrow for that hunt. There's a company in North Carolina, Ethics Archery. So I got some of their steel collars and things like that, and really built up a really strong front end. And I was shooting the airstrikes, those arrows at that point, a little more robust, I guess, than some of the arrows I'd been shooting before. And look, those that if you go and have a look at the YouTube video that I put up, like I punched straight through that front shoulder and it buried out and just came out the other side and broke. I didn't get a clean pass through, but I was able to get through one shoulder and out sort of in a thick area near the ribs on the other side. And I thought to myself, wow, if that's a bigger animal, I'm going to struggle to get through with this setup. And it was I was shooting a 70-pound Matthews VRX at the time.
Yeah.
So had a fair bit of grunt, but when you look at a nilgai versus a water buffalo, the water buffalo is almost twice as thick, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I did some more research, but where I landed was, well, I'm not having to punch through the shoulder on the water buffalo, and there's a couple of guys down here in Australia that shoot them a fair bit. Adam Greentree has some stuff up online, and then I was doing some reading about some of the guided hunts that they do, and a lot of people were still talking about using that mid 500 grain arrow. And so I was like, yeah, I can build something very similar to what I had for the nilgai, just put a little more weight up front. And so I had an arrow that was in that sort of 550 grain for that hunt. Never got to release one. In fact, I think I've still got those arrows in a box somewhere, and I'll pull them out one day. But I've kind of fallen back a little bit, and I'm now shooting a 450 grain. I found for the hunting that I like to do,
Mm-hmm.
particularly out west, where, I need to sort of shoot through some gaps and things like that. I want something a little flatter versus
Yeah.
something that's sort of lobbing in. Um, and I've had zero issues on the couple of elk and the mule deer and things that I've taken. I've found that 450 is enough with my 28-inch draw and 70-pound draw weight. I found that works well for me.
Yeah, that's the same thing for me. If you're shooting elk in heavy timber, that's the one thing. Like the last 5 bulls I've shot, it's always been shooting through a little pocket. You have twigs and stuff hanging everywhere, and you
Yeah,
need that flatter trajectory to hit your mark, right? You're not necessarily throwing long bombs all the time. You're shooting close, but you do need that tight trajectory to make sure that you're hitting.
yeah,
Especially
yeah.
even my first mule deer, shooting underneath undergrowth and almost have my cam hitting the ground. I was so
Yeah,
low. I had to
right.
squat down to shoot a mule deer at 40 yards. And, I just don't think I could have made that shot if I was shooting a 540 grain arrow. In
Yeah,
fact, I know I can't because I
yeah.
ran FMJs for a couple of years and I was hitting limbs, right? And that's a thing you have to consider. So out of all the hunts you've done, and like you said, like fallow deer and red deer and elk, what's your go-to? What's your most memorable hunt?
Yeah, I was thinking about this before the podcast in case this question came up.
Yeah.
Um, Look, to me, that first elk that I got in Montana will always be very special. That is something that I put a lot of time and effort into.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I spent that whole summer leading up to there doing all the scouting, putting in the time. And then when opening day came around, I was off on my own. Like I said, I had a couple of good friends there in Bozeman that sort of took me under their wing. But when hunting season starts, people are going to their spots, right? They're not
Yeah.
really willing to share with the new guy in town. So I went to my spots that I found. And anyway, it's about 7 days in, and I did hunt for a couple of days with a friend, a little south of Big Sky in some of the bear country down there. And a guy got attacked by a grizz when we're out, and I'm like, you know what? I don't need to be running into grizz out here. So I went a little further north, got out of that sort of that area where you had to worry about the grizzly so much. And I remember that morning going out. I was like, you know what? Today's the day. I feel like it's the last day of my 10-day hunt that I'd planned.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to enjoy it, right? Yeah, if I come across an elk, it'll be great. I had a couple of chances prior to that and never really got in close enough. And anyway, it was mid-morning. I was just cruising along, and I'm like, I'm just going to throw a bugle out. Going against what I said earlier, I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw just a random one out. And lo and behold, like straight over the top of me. I didn't even finish blowing through the tube, and this thing was just screeching at me. And I was like, oh, wow, he's close. And then I could see the bush moving, and he's running straight at me. And no time to get my bow ready or anything. I'm just standing there out in the open.
Yeah.
And he runs to like 40 yards, and he's staring straight through me. He knew I was there somewhere, but just couldn't pick me out.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, and he was kind of surveying, and he started walking off. And once he got behind some trees, I sort of regathered myself. Like I was shaking. Like the
Yeah.
adrenaline dump was huge. So anyway, I'm like, all right, get yourself composed. And I got back on the tube and sort of moved downwind a little. And I was like, I think he's going to try and come at me this way. So I moved downwind, and he came downwind as well. So, and anyway, he ran straight up to me again at about 20 yards. And it was really not quite frontal, but hard quartering too. And I was like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
just can't take that shot. I don't want my first shot on an elk to be one
Yeah.
that I'll regret. So I chose not to take the shot, and he ran off again. And I just sort of knelt down on the ground. I was like, oh, I've messed it up. I had my chance. I've worked so hard for this. And then he bugles again, maybe about 400 yards up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, all right, I know what I need to do. I need to go a little further down here. I'm actually going to cut him off. I've seen the way he's been coming. I'm going to go a little further wider on the expectation that he's going to move a little wider as well. So I did that and sort of found myself in an area, blew on the tube, and he just came running down. And there was this small gap at about 7 yards. I was like, all right, I could probably squeeze one in there and stop him. Anyway, he took a bit of a different line, and like you said, you've got these small windows.
Mm-hmm.
He stopped in a window. I could see all of his vitals through this gap at like 35, 40 yards. I was like, wow, this is just playing out perfectly. And I will never forget releasing that arrow. It was one of those ones where everything slowed down. I remembered
Mm-hmm.
the exact process I was going through. I'm like, yep, I'm going to send it right where it needs to be. It broke, and I just watched that arrow just go and hit the mark. And the sound it made, I'll never forget that. Just that
Yeah.
pop, that
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 whack.
double lung.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I just stopped and I watched him run off the hill and I saw him bust some timber. And I was listening. I was like, all right, he sounds as though he's gone down about 100 yards up the hill. And I just sat down on the ground and you could probably see it in me now a little bit too. That the emotions that just went through me that day, I was just like, I can't believe I've just done that, right? All the effort that I put in. And it was the one thing that I moved to Montana to really chase was elk. Anyway, yep, long story short, I sort of walked up there and there he was about 100 yards up, just laying on his side. And man, he was a ripper. Like for me, like he went 290 gross. He's not the biggest, but for my first elk doing it solo, that was super special.
Well, there's nothing better than elk in my mind. Like
Yeah.
like you say, the effort, and to me, there's no other animal that you can have that intimacy with, where you call them in, and that exhilaration of you're basically chasing a ghost, it feels like, and
Yeah.
just out of nowhere they just pop up,
Yeah.
and the more you hunt them, the more you understand them, the more you appreciate them, and good on you for, and this is something that I personally have always thought of. Okay, like that shot, if it's not in the vitals, it's not good enough, right? You need
Yeah.
those shots that are perfect, just because the animal's so durable, and
Yeah.
waiting. And I had something similar, exactly like you're saying. Like a bull came in frontal, planted himself right in a bush, his first bull elk, and just waiting. You're gonna get another chance, right? As long
Yeah.
as you don't blow it, you're gonna get another chance. And
That's
just
right.
work in that situation until you get your chance. And yeah, there's nothing like it. Walking up on a bull elk, whether you're a seasoned vet or it's a raghorn or your first bull or a spike, there really is nothing like it, because it is so hard. It is that, to me, that accomplishment with a bow and arrow, and you call him in, and walking up on him, even though it's like you kill a multiple bulls, it's always an emotional thing, because it could be your last, right? You're
Right.
so high of a bar of effort you got to put in. Every time you walk up on a bull, it's special, whether it's a 300 plus or a 4 point or a 5 point. It's always, it always feels like the first time. That's what I feel
Yeah.
like. It's
Yeah.
amazing, especially, first success on a bull elk with a bow and arrow. Come on, there's nothing
Yeah.
better, right?
Yeah, yeah. I again, right place, right time. But I put the hours in to make sure that I gave myself half a chance. And yeah, lucky for me that it played out the way it did. There's a lot of people that don't get that opportunity, right? So I feel very blessed to have had that chance.
Yeah, it's funny just drawing all the parallels between mule deer and elk, and like mule deer, the smallest mistake,
Yeah,
it's just punished to the maximum. And tying in with elk, it kind of seems like when you're bow hunting, you have all these situations where everything had to go perfect. And when you do, it's almost artistic. When you make
yeah,
that perfect shot, you think, and if you think about it, and it's good to stop when you make that shot. That's what the thing I like about it the most, is when you make that perfect shot, that execution. You came in clutch in those moments where,
yeah,
there's so many things, all these things that could have went wrong, but it didn't. And you made
yeah,
five decisions in a row, or six or more, that just worked. There's something beautiful about that, right? And
yeah,
thinking about, like, holy smokes, like, I freaking did it. I always
yeah,
like, ah. And when you're
yeah,
by yourself solo, you're like,
yeah,
there's no one here. Like, yeah,
yeah,
this is amazing feeling, right?
yeah,
But
yep,
yeah, no, man, I 100% agree that elk are the best,
yeah.
just for
Um,
that reason. And what an amazing story, man. especially coming from someone like yourself that's like I say, like is hunted all over the place, right? That's awesome, and especially being able to get it done before you move back to Australia. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So picking up on two things there, I want to come back to some. I want the listeners to understand that there was also some real miserable points leading up to that as
oh
well,
yeah.
right? I'll come to that in a minute, but picking up on your comment, man, the intimacy that you have with elk, I think I found it here with the red deer in Australia. But you can call them in, they'll roar, and you can find them. So it's very similar. The fallow. The fallow are a little bit easier, right? Man, they start croaking and you can walk in pretty close. You can get to 40, so
Hmm.
it's not as challenging. But you can rattle those guys in. Like some of my recent Instagram stuff, I've had them rattled into like 5 yards. So you can get a bit of that with the fallow, but the red is similar. And I've had a couple of chances here, and it just wasn't the right. It
Yeah.
just didn't play out right for me to release an arrow. I had one walk into like 5 yards, and I was stuck because I didn't see him coming, and he didn't see me until we were about 20 yards away. And then I stopped. He still hadn't seen me and walked, almost was about to run me over. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll try and squeeze one in quickly, but it just didn't happen.
Hmm.
So the invite's out. Come down here one year and we'll go chase some reds and some fellow out here. I know
Oh,
you'll love it. Um,
awesome. Sign
yeah,
me up. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
The
And look,
fallow deer are just so exotic, man. Like
yeah, they're
you look
cool.
at them, they're cool, man. I've
Yeah, they're
yeah, out of all like axis and fallow, that's one thing that man, I've always wondered that. I've never known anyone that's actually hunted them exclusively. And like, are they very jumpy? Are they like, what's their reflexes like? Like, what's the mentality? If you were to compare them, like I know you compared them to like kind of elk-ish. Like, what's their reflexes like as far as jumping the string and that type of
um
thing?
they're not quite whitetail crackhead sort
Yeah.
of animal. They're but um but they are skittish. That those fellow look, I've seen them in two different modes. I've seen them when they're rutting and you could release an arrow and you'll ping it. But I've been on the fringe of the rut, and like you get in and you draw back just like a whitetail. They see that little bit of movement, they're gone. Or a mule
Hmm.
deer, right? I think mule deer are a little slower than whitetail in my experience.
Yeah.
The mule deer are just more wily and they pick you out sort of coming in. So yeah, I'd equate them somewhere between maybe a whitetail and mule deer, sort of in that range. They're not a big deer. They're similar to like an East Coast whitetail. They're nothing like you get up in the Midwest. They're more that sort of southeast size.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe not some of the big ones that they get down in Georgia. I'll just say North Carolina type, Tennessee, some of that size whitetail. And but they're an animal that is accessible to the people down here. There's a lot of public lands where you can go hunting. There's some of the best hunting is on private lands here, but there's no tag system. There's no quota throughout the year. They're available to hunt year round. Um, so yeah, they're a good entry hunt for someone wanting to get into archery hunting in Australia. I think the fallow, on my limited experience bow hunting in Australia, is probably the gateway into some species. We have 6 species of deer here in Australia. I think there's two that I really need to go and get. You mentioned the axis. We call that a chittle. We have that in a couple of areas in Australia. That is on my list of things that I have to go hunt. And then we also have a sandbar deer down sort of in the southeast, and that equate that to an elk, big bodied, super thick terrain. Think of it like hunting maybe in Washington State, right?
Like
Really,
jungle.
really dense terrain, jungle, right? You're in the stuff where you'll walk up to 10 yards and you still haven't seen them, right? It's so thick. And that animal disappears, right? They move around one tree and they're gone. You're like, where did that go? So that's they're the two that I'm going to try and chase throughout the year. And if I remember correctly, the sandbar stay hard horned throughout the year. So
Oh,
there's always opportunities to go find a good one. So yeah, there's a lot of hunting opportunities out here. But one of the things I want to come back to, I said it just before. I've had some heartbreak in my archery career. So I shot a nice 9 point, nice for North Carolina, a 5x4, really nice looking white tail. And I got about 2 inches of penetration with that arrow. And this was this is before I really got down into the science behind,
yeah.
arrows, trajectory, all that sort of stuff. I was still naive to a lot of the stuff that I've spent time learning about now. And I'll never forget that day. My wife said to me when I walked up to the house, she's like, "What's wrong?" She could just see it on my face because I knew after it ran, I was like, that didn't get any penetration. I went and found
Hmm.
the arrow, and like I said, it's about 2 inches. Like, he's probably going to shrug it off, right? They're a pretty robust animal, those whitetails. But I went out and I tracked. I tracked that thing for about half a mile, this blood trail, and I could tell it wasn't good. There was no bubbles or anything in it.
Hmm.
And after 6 hours of tracking, I'm like, I just can't find any more blood. And that sits with me as one of the most disappointing things in my hunting career. I don't think the shot was bad. I just don't think my equipment was well tuned. I didn't have perfect arrow flight. I realize now that paper tear was probably poor at that point. My gear my gear wasn't where it needed to be, and that was one of the catalysts for me getting better as well. But what it made me realize is, hey, if that shot is not there, if you don't have those vitals, don't take it. It's not worth wounding an animal and
Yeah.
having it run for a couple of miles and never finding it. And the coyotes get it, right? There's that really sat with me, that hunt. And so it's something that I try to always think about when I'm in the field. It's like, all right, remember that bad hunt. Now think about when you get the opportunity today, make sure you take the time and make sure you have a good shot. And that's a 2 minute process that I have with myself. And it's easy to do, and it just gets me in a good frame of mind to
Yeah.
make sure that I'm taking those right shots. So for the listeners, take that for what it is. Just learn from those disappointments and make yourself better.
Yeah, and the more successful that you become, the more respect you have for those animals, and you really understand what you have to do to make it happen, and to make a merciful kill, and just being ethical, right? Like you're gonna have more chances. That's more
Yeah.
learning opportunities too, right? Those failures, there's more failure ahead. You shouldn't be scared of
Right.
failure, right? You're gonna
Yep.
get more chances.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's those learning experiences where you learn, okay, this wasn't good enough. That's when you grow, right? Like you're digging into your setups, you're making sure your bow is tuned. You very rapidly realize, or like that was a close call. Like man, like for instance, this last bowl this last year, I didn't get enough. Like I got penetration, but it wasn't what I was thinking was going to happen, right? And shit happens, right? It's not perfect. The
Yeah.
animal's moving around, they're trying to live, right? And
Right.
just that that little spark initiates, well, now I'm building my arrows again. I'm reworking stuff, right? And I'm changing things again. But that's all part of this continuous process of learning and uh and just everything that you learn. What I got a question for you. What's if you were to give some advice to a newcomer into bow hunting, maybe they're a rifle hunter, maybe they're just fish and they want to get into the outdoors and start shooting bow. What advice we give someone starting to get out there and hunt with a bow and arrow?
Yeah. Yeah. This is probably going to sound cliched, but put in the time. Put in the time, right? It's one of those things that
Hmm.
it wasn't until COVID hit when I was stuck at my house and I wasn't going to work. I was like, I've got the time now, right? I wasn't
Yeah.
commuting that hour in the morning, hour in the afternoon, and I had time to get up and shoot my arrow. So every morning before work, I was getting up, and I was shooting maybe 100 arrows in the morning and 100 at night, right? Because I had the time. And I was fortunate to have the time at that point. But my advice would be go to your local retailer. I'm not going to say don't go to the big box stores. If that's what you've got, then use it.
Yeah.
But if you pro shop, go and introduce yourself. Go and meet the people that are working behind the counter. Spend some time with them. Get them to help you get a setup that works. Have them paper tune the bow. All this stuff that sort of I learnt by myself can be fast tracked by investing in the shop that's local to you. Look, when something goes wrong with your equipment, it's the middle of bow season.
Yeah.
I don't know, you nick your string with your broadhead in a panic, right? And you need to go get it restrung. They're the guys that are going to help you out, right? So go and invest your money with them and get a good rapport. That's one thing that I did in Bozeman. Those guys at Straight Six, I'll give them a quick shout out. Those guys there, they really looked after me. Zach, Caroline, Cody, who looked after my bow and set it up for me. Look, I've got a lot of respect for that group of people, and I was happy to put my money in because they were also helping me understand, hey, when this happens, they give me insight. They're like, hey, when you come up an elk, you might be able to expect this, right? So there was all that information that I was gathering from just being nice to people, right? And having those conversations. So that would probably be my number one advice, or two. Spend the time with your equipment, but then also make sure you get your equipment from someone who knows what they're doing and is building that relationship with you, because at the end of the day, they ultimately want your repeat business, right? So they're going to help you to build that sort of relationship with you as well. Whereas my first bow was from it might have been from Bass Pro. I can't remember whether I bought it from Bass Pro or Cabela's, right? But the guys at the shop, it was just a transaction. They're just like, yeah, buy it, out the door, right? Didn't really help me get it set up or anything like that. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful manner, but their business is different. They've got a lot of other stuff that they're selling in those big box stores, whereas your local shop, it's a little more intimate. You're going to get those relationships and you're going to be able to garner a lot more information. And maybe the third thing, just because I said information, just dive into the internet, right? Go and find podcasts, go and find YouTube stuff. Just try and be a student of the game. Learn as much as you can. They would be the three things that I would really recommend to someone who's just getting into it. I was fortunate enough last fall, I finally drew my Wyoming tag after 6 years of putting in and building points. I went out to my mate's ranch and we went backcountry. From his ranch, we went another sort of 20 kilometers into the backcountry. Took some horses in, rode horses in, had a camp out there. It was excellent. But one of the boys that was with us, it was his first archery elk hunt. And so I got to watch him, and as I was watching him, I'm like, I used to do that. And I'm like, hey, Tom, think about maybe doing this a little bit differently, right?
Yeah.
Not trying to tell him what to do, but try and give that advice. So, when you're walking in, try not to be so heavy. Think about just walking a little quieter, taking a few steps sort of here and there. Check your wind, right? That's another one. That's a good one. Always check your wind when you're out in the field. Anyway, he got his first 6x6. I called one into him. To his credit, look, I'll give this guy credit for his first archery elk hunt. We pulled into this meadow and it was getting near the end of the day, and I'd shot mine 2 days before, and Sam, who was with us, got his the previous day. So Tom was the last of the three of us to fill his tag, and he's like, look, I don't have it in me to walk up this hill today. Why don't we set up down here? And I'm like, all right, you want to set up, right? Sort of baiting him into telling me all of what he's been learning. He's like, well, if I sit here, then, maybe the wind's coming down here. I'm like, get your wind checker out. And he's like, oh, okay, I can see it's moving a bit different. Yeah. And he's like, if I sit here and then maybe you go back sort of 10, 15 yards, then maybe you can call one in. And I was like, all right, I'll do what you want me to do. And so Anyway, we called one into 20 and he shot his first elk with his bow. Got a nice little 6x6 for his first one. So, but that was the thing, right? Getting out there, experiencing and picking up all that knowledge that he'd learnt from watching all of those and asking questions. So that'd be the last one. Build that information and then have the discipline to apply it in the field. I know that's easy to say after you've killed a few animals, right? When it's your first time out there. Hey man, I remember my first whitetail. I don't know how I got it done. I was in a panic, stuff was going everywhere, and it was an absolute yard sale. I remember after I shot that one, there's like stuff on the ground beside me, like it was chaos, right? I'd like to think I've progressed a little bit from then, but perhaps on some of those first species when you get your first chance, things happen like that elk. I was pretty cool, calm, collected. I remember calling it in, but as I went to put my release on the string, I was like, "Oh, get on there!" And I was struggling because the adrenaline was going. I was like, "Oh, just shaking a little, right?" But noticing that, slowed down, went through my process. Oh, maybe that's the last one. Sorry, I know I'm rambling a little bit here, Derek, but
it's all good.
Maybe the last one is build a shot process, right? For me, that is something that really allowed me to get better at going through the process when you've got the most adrenaline going, when it's high pressure. It's like, all right, I'm not thinking about the antlers. I'm thinking about getting my shoulders relaxed, right? When I draw back, making sure that elbow is relaxed and I'm not sort of all torqued out on it. Thinking about my hand position and then my 2 anchor points. So I've got a nose anchor and because I use a thumb button, I've got an anchor up there as well. And I'm like, get those 2 anchor points and then just settle in, make sure the scope is where it needs to be, my sight's right. And then think about, I'm putting that arrow on that section of hair right where it needs to go, and then just pulling through. So I have found for me, doing that shot process and also filming myself in my backyard in the tree, I was like, all right, I need to be careful with the camera. I need to go through that process. And I found that really helped me be more calm and get into the shot itself rather than letting the situation overwhelm me, which did happen earlier in my whitetail hunting.
What about getting into, I noticed that you've shot some TAC events and getting into the 3D realm. Tell me a little bit about that journey. Did you kind of tie that in with putting yourself in those stressful situations in order to stress test yourself and still execute the shot? So walk me through kind of your journey through that and how you got into that.
This was during COVID. I was living on acreage in North Carolina. So I backed onto like 15,000 acres of state park game land. So I had a lot of open area available to me. And I actually bought a target for this exact reason, because I found when I had my block target, I was typically shooting the ring in the center, right? So mentally I was thinking, I need to get in the center, right? And I remember another hunt where I was like, oh, I'm shooting a lot further back on these whitetail than I should be. And I think consciously in my head, I was looking for the middle of the body rather than where I'm aiming. And I honestly believe that was a result of the targets I was shooting at. So I actually got a 3D target, got a whitetail, put it in my backyard, and that's what I'd shoot 100 arrows into. It's just like, yep, I need to be in that heart double lung area. And then it became natural for me that once I started drawing on an animal, I found that my pin was going there where it needed to be. And so for me, that was an instant improvement that I got to see, instant gratification by shooting a target that mimics an animal. I was shooting in the right place, whereas prior it was just, I know I have to be there, but because I was always in the middle of the target, I think I was going
you got that mental programming. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
And then when I moved out to Montana, I actually went and did an elk class with a guy up in Washington State. He runs a whole bunch of elk programs, and he's got his own YouTube channel. People probably know who I'm talking about. He's also got a guy that runs a big archery shop out there. So I went and spent some time with them at one of the classes just to learn a bit more. Again, becoming a student, right? Learning how to blow a bugle tube and all that sort of stuff. But they invited me to go on the Montana at Big Sky, and that really opened my eyes. I was like, all right, I'm a little out of my element here, right? Like, yeah, North Carolina, you're in close, you're not shooting deer past sort of 20 yards. For me, if I'd struggle to shoot a whitetail past 25 yards these days. It'd have to be perfect conditions for 30 yards. And that's kind of where I'd been training previously. And then when we got to TAC, um, I was out there like, all right, we're going to go do the big course first. And the first one was like 60 yards. I was like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
Like, and I'd been playing with my bow and I had my sight tape in. And I was like, all right, I think I can do this. And then we had like a 95 yard on a moose. I think that was the second, maybe that was the first one on the Sitka course up at Big Sky. And I was like, holy shit, I'm going to have to really lob some arrows here and way out of my comfort zone. But putting in the time, like I said earlier, getting all my gear right, understanding my sight tape and stuff. I was like, oh, I can actually do this, right? Yeah, yeah. I wasn't shooting as well as those other guys, but I was only 6 inches away, right? I was like, yep, I'm in the area, right? And then that just got more ingrained into me. One of my friends in Bozeman, he has some property and he has like a little 3D course set up in his backyard. And we would spend a couple of days a week. We'd just go in there and we'd just shoot at these 3D targets, right? And we'd have games. We'd be games like, all right, sit down. We're eating lunch. You're sitting on your butt. You're just hanging out. Pick up your bow and shoot that mule deer out at 45 yards from a seated position, right? Building all of these things that can happen in the field, right?
Yeah.
In the field, I don't think I've taken a shot where it's like, all right, my feet are level, there's no wind, I'm all good, it's all perfect, everything's just perfect. I've never had that shot, right? It's always, well, things are going, chaos, they're running, okay,
Yeah.
here's your chance, settle in, take the shot, right? So building some repetition around that, shooting some stupid angles, like tucked in under trees, like you were saying
Yeah.
with one of your earlier hunts, getting down low so your limbs are close to the ground, you're off kilter, doing all of that stuff. And I got a lot of that through the 3D events that I did and in my friend's backyard. And to me, I think there was also something, now that we talk about it, that really improved my hunting and probably got me into the mindset. It's like, all right, you can do this. If you find yourself in these situations, you've done it before. You've taken these bad shots. Don't actively try and get into one of those bad positions. Take your time. Like you said, you'll get another chance, right? And then finding the one, oh yeah, this one's better. I can do this, and going through that shot process.
Yeah, and you realize that there is no perfect situation,
Yeah,
and sometimes it's good enough.
yeah, that's right.
Like the last few kills, like they're always weird positions. Like I had one where I had to draw back on this last bull that I shot, and he jumped over this blowdown right beside me, like point blank, and I had to full draw, go all the way up around a tree, and then shoot him point blank to my left. You can't you
Yeah,
can't like how do you simulate that at the range? Well, you shoot sitting, you shoot kneeling, you shoot in awkward positions, you try and create situations as best as you can that
yeah,
just lets you know that no, like I can make those shots,
yeah.
and hardly ever am I going to be perfect form and standing. Like obviously we need those fundamentals. They
Sure.
need to be there, but um when we're trying to be successful in the field and we're hunting, you don't want the form and situation to be the first time you encountered it. Is full draw with a snot dripping down their nose, bugling elk running in full tilt at you. You want some shit rehearsed, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
we've had Dan on the podcast a while back, and it's just I think about like the early days and compared to now, like people getting into hunting, they have so many resources. It's actually
Oh
amazing,
yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
you have a lot of things that you can pull from, and and Corey Jacobs and Elk 101, Randy Newberg, all these characters out there.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And like you say, just put yourself in those uncomfortable situations, right? Like shooting 90 when you've been shooting 25, 30 yards. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yep.
really find out rapidly, like, can my sight even shoot that far?
Yeah, that's
Like
right.
it's different, right? So, putting yourself in those situations, yeah, that's paramount. Get
Yeah.
that confidence.
Yeah, and I think another part to all of that is checking your ego in at the trailhead,
Yeah.
right? It's one of those things that, yeah, look, like I said before, I got my first bull elk. I had a couple of opportunities, but I don't know. I don't know if it was me getting in way of myself, but I'm like, yeah, I can do this, and I was getting sort of maybe being a little too aggressive in my approach to it, and
Hmm.
thinking, I've got this all figured out, when really I hadn't. I like that first week in the field. It was a humbling experience, right? And then, like I said, that one I got on the last day, I was just kind of out there cruising. I'm like, yeah, if I get it done, I get it done, right? I'd taken a different mindset, and maybe that's just luck that it all played out that way. But I think that's the other thing. Like I've seen some people that I've hunted with that go into the field and they're like, "I know everything. I like this. This is a slam dunk." It ain't, right? And
No.
that's the other thing for people that are just getting into it. Like for me last season in Montana, I didn't fill a tag. Like, yeah, I managed to put one down in Wyoming as an out of stunt, but in my home state of Montana, I didn't. I had bear, elk, um, mule deer, and antelope. And I didn't release an arrow. Actually, I did. I released one arrow. It was a poor shot. Um, but luckily it didn't hit the animal. But I just didn't get that chance, right? And after all that success leading up to there, being successful for seasons and seasons on end, traveling overseas, getting animals in different countries, I couldn't get it done in my home state, right? And so it's a reminder that, hey, this is a humbling thing. Just because you've built a knowledge base and a skill set doesn't mean it's going to work every time. You have to be a student of the game and you have to learn, right? The elk they're going to be doing something different from season to season. They're not going to be on the same water holes. Maybe there's not enough rain the year that you're out there. I don't know. Maybe a hunter's come through and pushed them out, and they're all booging out of there, and they're all on edge, right? So all these things that you need to think about, and I think being humble about it and going in with, hey, I'm here to do my best. Yeah, it's going to be awesome if I put one down. Taking that approach versus, yeah, I can do it, right? Like having self-confidence is important. Don't get me wrong, right? I do go in with the mindset that I've got the skills to do this, but also acknowledging that there's a lot of stuff that's out of my control. And just accepting that and going in, I think that's another important thing for people to take into the field.
Yeah, it is very humbling. I remember I think it was 2022. I've learned this as I've matured in my hunting career that the one time that you got it done on day one, maybe a couple hours in, oh, you're gonna pay for that. The bow hunting gods will make you suffer. That's
Yeah.
one thing. As soon as just like with many other things in life, as soon as you think you got it all figured
Yeah.
out, life is going to give you a big kick in the ass. And
Yeah.
especially if you're going to do mule deer hunting, that is the humbling one because
Right.
I shot a bull elk. I went out in 4 hours. I got it done, packed them out, and I think I'm the king of bow hunting. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm going to get humbled here again. And sure as shit, start hunting mule deer again, and they very quickly showed me I knew jack shit.
Yeah.
And oh no, bus picking apart my stocks and humbling you again, right? And that's just it. If you go into each hunt with an open mind and you actually give it your all, you're taking in all the information. You do have the past experience that shortens the time frame of you learning this stuff, but you know, just taking in, okay, this is day two, day three, it's not working.
Yeah.
Like maybe I don't call, maybe I start covering terrain, maybe I got to move areas, right? That's where that experience really comes into play and why guys like yourself, like, yeah, you're not successful every single tag and neither am I, but you're able to put those pieces together quicker, adapt, do the things that you need to do. And then even if you don't fill a tag or you pass up a smaller bull or a smaller buck, at least you can be satisfied with the hunt. You gave it your actual all. You made some changes. And I think everyone should be, every year you should be trying to accomplish. If you're a spot and stalk guy and that's everything you do, maybe try and call on a bull. Maybe try and add that element, or maybe you're only calling. Maybe try a spot and stalk. You know, create these different elements that you can, these skill sets you can pull from each year. Because, like you say, like especially in your circumstance, you're hunting a very broad spectrum of species, and you cue in on these different things. Like some are eyesight, some are smell, some are sound,
Yeah.
right? And if you have all these different skill sets, you can kind of combine them to do whatever you need to do to be successful in the field. And
Yeah.
and that's really what's about, right? Is getting out there, failing a ton, and hopefully you have some success and some luck. Luck's always involved. I swear, those 200-inch mule deer, they're smart and they're lucky.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Just like
Yeah.
human beings of like, oh, that guy's got a horseshoe shoved up his
Yeah.
ass. There's deer and elk like that, where it's just like,
Absolutely.
how the heck did that arrow hit its mark? Like
Yeah.
gust of wind or something crazy, uncontrollable factors, right?
Yeah. That's
That's
right.
what keeps, I don't know about you, but that's what keeps me coming back for more is no matter what you did in the past, that doesn't matter.
No,
It's
that's
this
right.
season is the only thing that matters. Those elk, they don't care that you killed 8 other bulls, right?
That's right.
Got to get her done every year. And
Yeah, that's right.
yeah,
That's
man,
right.
it's we're just a part of this journey, man. And yeah, well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Awesome talking with you. You got a lot of stuff going on. We'll put in the show notes your YouTube and links and stuff. But why don't you let the listeners know where they can get a hold of with everything you're doing and everything you got going on?
Yeah. So I think the easiest place is to find me on Instagram. It's just I am Will Galton. You can find me there. My YouTube channel's been a bit idle. The last year with taking a new job and moving overseas, that's been put on hold. I'm working on a bit of a pilot that I've got some footage for, and I'd like to get a little bit of a series going. So watch out for that. You'll be able to find that at YouTube at Will's Gone Walkabout. And look, I've said this to a lot of people I've met. Hit me up in the DMs, message me on YouTube. I'm all about sharing information. I'm happy to do that. I won't tell you the secret spots that I've got, but I'll
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll certainly share knowledge that I think will be beneficial to others. So yeah, they're probably the best places you can find me. Or in the mountains down here in Australia now,
Yeah.
and maybe yeah.
Yeah, that'd be luck to run into you. That's
Yeah.
for sure. All right. Well, thank you again. And yeah, awesome chatting with you. This is a wicked show. Really appreciate
Thanks, Derek.
talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
Okay.
Appreciate it.